We have bars. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to our Sunday morning class. We are continuing our uh, walk through the Gospel of Luke. We are still in chapter 7. And we left off at a point last week where Jesus received a visit from some of the disciples of John the Baptist. And of course, we know that John the Baptist had a key role in the ministry of Jesus. He was the one who announced and basically made people aware of the coming of the Messiah, the coming of Jesus, and very effective with that. And I mean, this was not just any job for any man of God. This was a key job, and it could be that John was thinking, I'm going to have a very special place in everything that rolls out from here. And to his surprise, maybe to his surprise, he finds himself in prison, and of course, he will be executed because he winds up on the wrong side of Herod and his wife. And maybe that is going through his mind when he sends these disciples to Jesus up in Galilee, and he- they, w- he sends them with the questions in terms of, "Are you the one who's to come, or should we expect someone else? Are you who I was sure you were? Are you really the Messiah, or was I mistaken?" And is there an implied criticism? Maybe so. Maybe, like we mentioned, John is going through a phase of doubt based on what's going through in his life. And so that's the question to Jesus. And he doesn't give them a direct answer, but he says, and this was coming at a point where he was healing and curing people who were demon possessed or had an illness and so forth. Uh, and he has a simple reply to John's friends. He says, "Go back and report to John what you've seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor." This is not really Jesus is not evading a direct answer. He's just pointing back to what the Messiah was prophesied that he would do when he came. And of course, these are prophecies from the book of Isaiah. And it says, go back, read the prophecies, read what was promised, and compare them to what I'm doing now. And I think you'll get your answer as to whether I'm the real one. And he adds, verse 23, "Blessed is the man who does not stumble, who does not fall away, who is not offended, who is not scandalized because of me, who is not shocked by what I am doing," and hangs in there. The implicit message is someone who has great faith in me and who's willing to hang on to that faith even when their expectations are challenged or maybe even proved wrong. Well, the story continues, verse 24. After John's messengers left, Jesus began to speak to the crowd about John. "What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed swayed by the wind? If not, what did you go out to see? A man dressed in fine clothes? No, those who wear expensive clothes and indulge in luxury are palaces." Jesus is saying, hey, look, when you went out to see John, what did you go to see? Did you go to see someone who people said was a wild man, an unhinged man, a man who dressed funny? I mean, did you go out to the wilderness to get fashion tips from John? I don't think so. You could easily get an idea of what the fashionistas were wearing and dictating without ever leaving the city. That's not what you went out to see or hear about. But verse 26, what did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written. And here Jesus quotes a passage from the book of Malachi, saying, I will send my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way before you. Clearly, a messianic message. This is something that God speaks to the Messiah and saying, as you go or before you go, I will send your messenger out to prepare the way so that people are aware that you are coming. Hey, prophecy fulfilled, right? And Jesus continues and makes a very startling statement, I think. Intriguing statement. He says, I tell you, among those born of women, there's no one greater than John. Yeah, he's more than a prophet. He was a very, very special prophet, a key man, a very important guy. Yet, the one who is least in the kingdom of God is greater than he. Interesting thing to say. What does that mean? Well, we could probably spend the next 2 or 3 weeks debating that. I think Jesus is pointing out that with the blessings that are yet to come when the Spirit arrives and is fully unleashed upon his people, Jesus' people, the church, they're going to be empowered to do great things, probably greater things that the people standing there right now could not even imagine. And food for thought. There, you may have a different take, or you may come upon a different interpretation, all to the good, because I think this is a thought-provoking statement. What does that say? What is Jesus saying about John? But more important, what is he saying about us as members of his church? And then here at verse 29 and 30, John inserts a parenthetical comment here. In fact, most of the translations it'll be open parenthetical, because Luke is making an observation here. All the people, even the tax collectors, even those miserable, hated people that any righteous Jew would despise, even they, when they heard Jesus' words, acknowledged that God's way was right because they had been baptized by John. Remember, John preached but also practiced a baptism of repentance. Basically, he was helping folks understand and be aware and be ready for the coming of the Messiah through this act. And so those who received John's baptisms were open to the teachings of Jesus, and who were basically said, we agree with what Jesus is saying. We agree with what he's doing. This is the Messiah. But verse 30, the Pharisees, the experts in the law, those Jewish religious officials, those people who are at least 29% smarter than everyone else, those people who know everything, or so they say, rejected God's purpose for themselves. In other words, these Jewish officials, religious officials, who should have known better, who should have been in there pointing the way toward Jesus, pointing in the way, saying, here is the Messiah, who had the capacity to do it if their hearts were open, but refused to do it. They rejected God's purposes for themselves because they had not been baptized by John. And implicitly, by rejecting John's baptism, they reject essentially everything that John taught, everything that John was pointing to about Jesus and Jesus' role. Therefore, oh, no. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's going on with a vengeance. Hmm. Yes, yes. Jesus had a lucky day. Everything lined up at the right time. Yeah, right. Um, we've been talking about the kind of the tribalism that we see going on in our society right now, and you think, gee, this is kind of new. I don't recall things being this bad. Well, maybe it ebbs and flows, but hey, nothing really new. They had tribalism back in their day too, and we're seeing an example of this. And so, you know, they reject John and they reject Jesus. In fact, you kind of see a shoot the messenger mentality here. And, I don't like you and I don't like anything about you because I've made up my mind. This is what is right and this is what is wrong. And if what you're telling me doesn't line up with that, then you're no good at all. And Jesus, verse 31, Luke continues his narrative. Jesus, and if you're reading the New King James Version, uh, that's translated as the Lord went on to say, to what then can I compare the people of this generation? What are they like? They are like children sitting in the marketplace and calling out to each other. We played the pipe for you and you did not dance. We sang a dirge and you did not cry. That was probably, you know, their version of nanny nanny boo boo, if you can imagine. But basically, hey, we we're playing a game with you and you're not cooperating. You're not playing along. You know, we played some music. We expected you to dance and you just stand there and stare at us. You know, and we played funeral. We played this funeral song and that was your cue to play like you were crying. And again, you're not cooperating. You're not playing. You're not being nice. You're being mean. You know, it's a response of kids who are pouting when you don't play their game. Well, if you're not going to be that way, I'm going to go off. I'm going to collect my marbles and go home, and so forth. And John, is Jesus trying to make a point here? Yeah. Keep on reading, verse 33. John the Baptist came neither eating bread nor drinking wine. And of course, we know the reason why, because he was a Nazarite. That was part of the promise and the prophecy made about John. What do Nazarites do? Well, there's one thing they don't do. They have nothing to do with any kind of grape product, including drinking wine. So John didn't do that. John abstained from wine and he fasted. And you guys say he is a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking. And you say, here's a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Hard to distinguish one from the other, tax collectors and sinners. In other words, we're seeing, we talk about certain people having kind of a derangement syndrome where they despise someone so bad and so much that they'll look for anything to criticize them about, even if it's inconsistent. Again, we think, hey, this is something relatively new. No, Jesus is pointing out, hey, this was going on in my day too. You criticize John because he doesn't drink. You criticize me because I have a glass of wine. And you call me a drunkard, or again, if you're reading the New King James Version, you call me a wine bibber. I like that word. Especially now that Thanksgiving is here, try to use that in a sentence or Thanksgiving dinner time, if you can. You condemn me for being the exact opposite of what John was, and there's no, what does it mean? It just means that haters, as we say today, haters gotta hate. If you despise someone enough, you'll think of anything to criticize them, to justify your hatred, to justify your animosity. Jesus says, this is what's going on here. There's no rhyme or reason to it. There's no consistency. There's no way to build a path toward understanding, because all you want to do is be mad and be angry and be hateful toward people like me. But tell you what, if you're confused about all this, Jesus says, look at the results of what we do. If we are bad people, why do we keep doing good things? Verse 35, wisdom is proved right by all her children. In other words, wisdom, those deeds, those words that come from wisdom, from someone who's following God's plan, doing God's will be manifested. Good people, wise people don't do evil things, Jesus is saying. Look at what we do, before you make up your mind about whether we're lacking something here. Well, a very fascinating discussion here, but comes mealtime. That leads us to another episode, verse 36. Now, one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him. So Jesus went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. And something very unusual happens. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. So she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. Something that looks unusual, maybe even bizarre, maybe even shocking. What's going on here? Well, first of all, Jesus is dining with the Pharisee. Hey, I thought the Pharisees hated Jesus. Well, no doubt that some of them really did, but there were others who said, I'd like to learn more about this Jesus. Maybe engage him in conversation. Maybe even trap him in some lot, illogical inconsistencies, whatever. But anyway, this Pharisee named, and we'll find out that his name is Simon, invites Jesus. This is probably, if not in Capernaum, it's in some other city in the region in Galilee. So Jesus accepts, goes to the house, and this is dinner with the Pharisee. It almost sounds like a podcast, doesn't it? You could almost hear Simon saying, "Hi, I'm Simon the Pharisee. Join me on my latest podcast with the Dinner of the Pharisee. Tonight we'll be talking with Jesus, the alleged prophet and teacher. And also we'll be discussing which is the better dip for flatbread. Is it vinaigrette or ranch?" Uh, you know, you can get this episode on anywhere you download your podcasts. Oops, problem. They did not have podcasts back in the day. So what did they do? A guy like Simon who wanted to basically get some mileage out of this dinner. Well, probably what we have here is it's not really a come and go dinner, but it's probably the next best thing because probably Simon did not feed everyone, but the people of the village were welcome to come and go and listen to the discussion because hey, Simon wasn't dining with just anybody. He was dining with someone who claimed to be the Messiah and certainly was considered to be a great prophet, a great healer. So people would come in, maybe just stay for a few minutes, but they would they probably gathered around the corners of the room so they could hear the conversation going on. And of course, we know what dining was like back in the day, not the kind of table and chairs that we have today. The table was very, very low, and you didn't sit. You actually reclined on your side because that was the custom, which meant that you laid down and your feet were out behind you. So it would have been no problem at all for someone to see everybody's feet, if not trip over them. But something even more unusual happens. Here comes this woman, and apparently it's a woman with a bad reputation. The way she's described by Luke, maybe she was a prostitute. We don't know. Luke doesn't get into the details. Basically, she's a woman who lives a sinful life. She has a bad reputation. In fact, if Simon had somebody at the door, that she might have been turned away. I'm sorry, you're not good enough to be here. But she finds her way in, and it's not she's more than there just to be part of the audience. She brings with her an alabaster jar of perfume. Now, the perfume and the jar that it held are both very, very expensive deals. This, you might have been, she may have paid something like a year or two's worth of wages with what held in her hand. And this was this alabaster jar was basically a one-time use. What's the only way you could open it was to break the neck open. Once you did that, you were committed. But that's what she does. She um, she anoints Jesus's feet. She stands behind him weeping. She began to wet his feet with her tears. I find it hard to imagine someone who cried so hard that there'd just be this mountain of tears, but this was going on, and um, but there's enough of she cries enough that Jesus's feet is wet. Uh, it's also she's also anointed his feet, and she needs to wipe them clean. She doesn't have any kind of napkin, so she does what does she do? She lets down her hair. If the fact that she had a soiled reputation wasn't bad enough, this was even worse. A lady of distinction did not let down her hair in public. This is what she does. Not only that, she uses her hair to wipe Jesus' feet. Shocking. She kissed Jesus' feet and then poured the perfume on them. Well, this is quite a show. Apparently, a real conversation stopper. So much so that when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who's touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. If at the very least, if he's a rabbi, he would be kicking her away because no righteous Jew, especially no righteous Jewish official, would even consent to be anywhere near a sinful person, much less uh, allowing themselves to be touched by them. Jesus, this is the conversation that's going on in Simon's head. He's not saying anything out loud that would be designed to embarrass either Jesus or the woman, but Jesus knows what's going on in his head. So, verse 40, Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. Two people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii. In today's dollars, that's probably roughly around $85,000, something like that, give or take. The other person owed 50, or about $8,500, a tenth of what the other person had. Much, much less than the other person, but still, it's more than either person can pay. Neither of them had the money to pay him back. What did the moneylender do? Something very shocking, something very unusual. He forgave the debts of both. Told him, don't worry about it. We're good. Go your way. Now, in the face of this outrageously gracious act, which of them will love the moneylender more? And Simon, you can kind of almost see the look on his face like, I'm being set up. Jesus is painting me into a corner here. What do I say? He's driving a point home. I got to say something that's reasonably intelligent. So this is what Simon replied. I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. And with the attitude of, well, I had to say something. Okay, is that your point, Jesus? Okay, I acknowledge that. You're not going to get any more argument from me on that. Jesus has more to say. You're right. Simon, you have judged correctly. But he goes on. Jesus turned toward the woman. He turned around to face her. And he said to Simon, Simon, do you see this woman? And you can imagine probably the way customs were in that day and age. Someone with a sullied reputation like this woman, everybody kind of averts their gaze, I see you, but I don't see you. I see you enough that I won't trip over you or bump into you. But that's about as far as it goes. No eye-to-eye contact. Jesus is making the eye-to-eye contact with this woman. And he's challenging Simon to do the same. He says, Simon, do you see this woman? And he says, this is the intro of the point Jesus is making. He calls Simon out on three things. Simon, you're a wonderful host, wonderful dinner, but three things you might want to discuss with either your hired help or whatever. But hey, look, I came into your house. And if not just me, but anyone else who's a guest at your house, there are three things you're supposed to do. And you didn't do them, Simon. You did not give me any water for my feet. This was one of the customs. Hey, most folks in that day and age, they didn't wear shoes and socks. And everywhere, if they needed to go somewhere, they walked. And they walked usually wearing sandals, otherwise barefoot. What do you do with a guest like that when they come in for dinner? You're supposed to wash their feet. That's a common courtesy that the host was supposed to provide. Jesus points that out. He says, you didn't give me any water from my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. Other things, Simon. Point number 2. Gracious host would greet his guest with a kiss. Even, a guy greeting another guy, he would take him by the shoulders and kiss him on the cheek. We see those, what the French do in all those old movies. Well, it was something like that. Yeah, it was nothing odd or oddball about it. That was just another part of the custom. You acknowledge their presence. More than that, you acknowledged it warmly by kissing them on the cheek. Simon, you didn't give me a kiss. A perfunctory kiss, I'll kiss you on the cheek and get it over with. Not even that. But this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. Third thing, Simon, you didn't put oil on my head. That was the third thing that a really, really good host would do for his guest, or he or his, the hired help, the servants. They would put a little oil on the head, cool them off, especially if they've been working out in the field all day. They're hot, they're dusty. Hey, let me put a little oil on your head. It'll cool things off, clean you up a little bit, make you feel better. Simon didn't do that. Everybody just came in the way they were. Simon, there were 3 things you didn't do, and one of them was anointing me and putting oil on my head. But she has poured perfume on my feet. And you know what, Simon? I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little. Gee, didn't come right out and say it, but Simon, you've got a heart problem. You've got a love problem. You have your attitude, not just toward me, but toward the people in your village, the people you're supposed to serve, the people you are supposed to love because you are God's representative. You're not very loving. Maybe we need to talk about what's in your heart, what's in your life, what needs forgiveness. It's easy to point the finger at someone like this poor woman and say she's in need of forgiveness. I got news for you, Simon. You're all in need of forgiveness as far as God is concerned. What are you going to do about it? And then to make the point, Jesus said to the woman, your sins are forgiven. Wow. Everybody picks up on that. The other guests began to say among themselves, who is this? Who is this rabbi, this prophet, who even forgives sins? Because no one can forgive sins except God alone. So this man either has a very highfalutin opinion of himself, or if he indeed can forgive sins, maybe he is what everybody is saying he is, that he really is the Messiah, that he is. Son. And to drive the point home, Jesus said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." So you have a forgiven woman who, as far as everybody else in the town is concerned, the worst sinner in the world. But she doesn't have to worry about her sin problem anymore. She's received forgiveness. Can you imagine the conversations among Simon's guests as they went home? Did this break up the party? Like, oh, look at the time. I got to be at work early. Thanks for the dinner. It was wonderful. Uh, can I take a dessert home? My wife would really love it. That kind of thing. Rapid. Did everybody kind of leave rapidly afterward? And if they did, what did they talk about? Did they talk about this remarkable conversation that Jesus had with Simon and with the woman? Food for thought. Thought-provoking, something that's thought-provoking, I think, even today. Something to think about as we go into Thanksgiving week, Thanksgiving dinner. Thanksgiving is, that's why they call it Thanksgiving. It's supposed to be a time, a special occasion where we think about the blessings we've received, what to be grateful and thankful for. That's a good conversation to have with each other, good conversation to have with God this week. So if you will, do that. And also, if you will, look at chapter 8, and that'll be the basis of our lesson for next Sunday. Anyway, thank you very much for your time and attention. Hope you have a great week. I would never tell you to eat too much turkey. Hey, man, stuff yourself. This is one of those meals where you're supposed to do that, or you're insulting the cook. So anyway, and yes, there'll be no wine bibbing around here. Anyway, Lord willing, we'll see you all here next Sunday. Thanks.